Hello and welcome or welcome back. My name is Melanie, but my friends call me Melon. If you want to be friends, all you gotta do is click the subscribe button down below. Now, let's get started.
Before starting, I would just like to thank the subscriber for suggesting this topic. So thank you, and let's get into it.
On the shore of Mount Hope Bay, and about 50 miles from Boston, is the city of Fall River, Massachusetts. By the 1800s, Fall River became known for its numerous cotton textile mills as well as its iron and gas industries. Andrew Borden was born into a modest life on September 13th, 1822. As he grew older, Andrew started working as a carpenter for Southard Miller until he left 2 years later to manage his Uncle Thomas's property. In 1845, Andrew established a business with a man named William M. Almy that performed several functions, including furniture and cabinet making, real estate, as well as undertaking. In this case, meaning he supplied coffins, chairs, horses, burial assistance, and clothing for the deceased, as opposed to embalming the deceased. The business ended up being very lucrative in the long run. That same year, Andrew married Sarah Morse from Somerset across the river. Over the years, Andrew had made a name for himself as a dignified, reserved man, courteous in manner, and strictly honorable in all his doings, and that although he had considerable leisure time, he was rarely to be found where men are accustomed to congregate. He also had a reputation for being outspoken in his advocacy of temperance and moral issues. In 1851, Sarah gave birth to the couple's first daughter, Emma. 9 years later, on July 19th, 1860, Lizzie was born. Sarah passed away from uterine congestion and spinal disease only 3 years later, leaving 12-year-old Emma to help raise Lizzie. Growing up, Lizzie and Emma were raised with Bibles in their hands, regularly attending church and teaching Sunday school at Central Congregational Church. Emma even attended boarding school for 18 months, and as a young woman, Lizzie became very passionate about the women's Christian temperance movement. In 1866, Andrew, now 44 years old, remarried with a 38-year-old woman named Abby Durfee Gray. Lizzie insisted on calling her stepmother Mrs. Borden and believed that Abby had married her father for his wealth. In 1890, the Bordens hired an Irish immigrant named Bridget Sullivan as their maid. Bridget had emigrated from Ireland to Newport, Rhode Island in 1866 and moved to Fall River in 1889. Lizzie expressed to her father that she did not approve of him granting his property to Abby and her family. She also insisted that the family move to the more wealthy area of Fall River called The Hill, far away from all the immigrants in their current neighborhood on 2nd Street. On June 24th, 1891, cash and jewelry were stolen from the Borden home, while Lizzie, Emma, and Bridget were actually in the house. The prime suspect for the crime was Lizzie herself, who had previously been caught shoplifting from a local shop. From this point on, the Borden household kept all doors locked. Around May or June of 1892, it is rumored that Andrew used a hatchet to kill pigeons in the family barn to prevent local children from hunting them. Lizzie was reportedly very upset about this because she had recently built the pigeons a roost. This event was never proven to have occurred, however. In July, the sisters took a long vacation to New Bedford after a family argument, returning to Fall River at the end of the month. Lizzie and Emma stayed at a tenant house for 4 days before going back to the Borden home. On August 2nd, Abby and Andrew complained about stomach pains. Abby visited the family's physician, Dr. Seabury Bowen, and told him that she felt that their milk had been poisoned by one of the enemies Andrew may have acquired over the years. On August 3rd, Lizzie and Emma's uncle, John Morse, arrived at the Borden house to spend the night. The next day, Lizzie confided in her friend Alice Russell that she was afraid of being poisoned by her father's enemies and that she'd seen strange people lurking around the house, even saying about her father, "I'm afraid sometimes that somebody will do something to him. He is so discourteous to people." On the morning of August 4th, 1892, Bridget was going about her duties as she normally would, despite being sick. John Morse departed from the house around 8:50 and was planning to return for lunch. Andrew left for his morning walk about 10 minutes later. Abby went upstairs at some time between 9 and 10:30 to straighten up the guest room, although that was one of her stepdaughter's chores. At about 10:30, Andrew returned from his walk to find that he was unable to get inside because the door was jammed. He knocked and Bridget then let him inside. She then hooked the screen door again and laid down in her bed for some time. Andrew then settled into the couch for a nap. At about 11:15, Bridget heard Lizzie yelling for her to come downstairs. When Bridget asked what was wrong, Lizzie replied, "Come down quick, father's dead, somebody came in and killed him." When Bridget came down, Lizzie said, "Oh, Maggie, don't go in. I have got to have a doctor quick. Go over. I have got to have a doctor." In the meantime, Lizzie stood at the screen door, attracting the attention of her neighbor, Adelaide Churchill, who called out her window to Lizzie to ask what was wrong. Lizzie told her to come over and that someone had just killed her father. When Adelaide asked where Lizzie was when it happened, Lizzie replied, "I went to the barn to get a piece of iron." After fetching Dr. Bowen, Maggie asked where Lizzie was and told her that she thought she hooked the screen door. Lizzie told her, "I was out in the backyard and heard a groan and came in and the screen door was wide open," then told her to go fetch Alice because she couldn't be alone in the house. Upon returning to the house, Bridget and Alice found Lizzie, Adelaide, and Dr. Bowen, who declared Andrew's death a murder. He had fallen asleep on the couch in the sitting room and received 29 axe wounds to the head. Bridget expressed that she wished she knew where Abby was so she could inform her of the situation. Abby had received a note to visit a sick friend and reportedly left the house earlier that morning. Lizzie told her, "Maggie, I am almost positive I heard her coming in. Why don't you go upstairs to see?" Bridget did not want to go alone, so Adelaide went upstairs with her. Upon approaching the spare room, Bridget and Adelaide found Abby's body laying face down underneath the bed. The ladies immediately went back downstairs and informed the others that there had been a second murder. Abby's head had been smashed to pieces from being struck with an axe 18 times while she was making the bed. Dr. Bowen called for the police. Officer George W. Allen arrived at the house with local artist John Sawyer. John guarded the door for Officer Allen, only allowing police inside. Officer Allen then reported the incident to Marshal Rufus B. Hilliard. Investigators found Andrew's body warm, whereas Abby's body was cold, further examination proving that Abby was killed about 1 hour prior to her husband. Lizzie insisting on the fact that Abby was not her mother, but her stepmother. The murder weapon was not officially found, but an axe was found in the basement of the Borden home. An article titled "Shocking Crime, a Venerable Citizen and His Aged Wife Hacked to Pieces in Their Home" was published in the Fall River Herald. Over the left temple, a wound 6 by 4 inches wide had been made, as if it had been pounded with the dull edge of an axe. The left eye had been dug out, and a cut extended the length of the nose. The face was hacked to pieces, and the blood had covered the man's shirt. The bodies were the only signs that any foul play had occurred, as the room was in order otherwise. The Fall River Herald also heavily speculated on the culprit being a Portuguese laborer, who had supposedly asked Andrew for the wages due him and got upset over Andrew telling him to call later. According to the Fall River Herald, evidence gathered at the scene suggested that Abby was murdered by a tall man who struck the woman from behind. The xenophobia that fueled Lizzie's desire to move to the hill was also obviously rampant in the city of Fall River. A funeral was held at the Borden house for Abby and Andrew on August 6th. When the foreign murderer theory fell flat, suspicion started to fall on 32-year-old Lizzie. On August 30th, an article was published in the New York Times titled "Bad Day for Lizzie Borden. Drug clerks say she tried to buy prussic acid." This was the day before the murder. Miss Borden denied it, saying she was never in the store before, still as self-possessed as ever. It's a long title. Whoa. The article referred to a clerk at S.R. Smith's drugstore named Eli Bentz, who told police that Lizzie had tried to purchase prussic acid, also called hydrogen cyanide, a very strong and fast-acting poison that causes asphyxiation and subsequently death. After review of the evidence, the police inferred that the killer must have been inside the Borden home, and one physician stated that hacking is almost a positive sign of a deed by a woman who is unconscious of what she is doing. On August 9th, Lizzie, Bridget, John Morris, and others were examined and questioned for 4 hours by Judge Josiah Blaisdell and District Attorney Hosea Knowlton at the inquest for the Borden murders. According to an article in the Fall River Herald, Lizzie had broken down under the strain. In the same article, Town Alderman John Beatty stated, "Supposing it was a woman, she was cunning enough to wear a loose wrapper, which would have covered her clothes and gloves, which would have protected her hands from the stains of blood. If so, there was time to burn both wrapper and glove in the hot ironing fire, which is known to have been burning in the kitchen on the day of the tragedy, and it is hard to believe that the murderer escaped by the side door. Lizzie's sister Emma had witnessed a blue dress hanging in the kitchen the day of the murders, and on August 7th, she witnessed Lizzie burning the same dress in the kitchen fire. After speaking with a Pinkerton detective named O.M. Hanscom, Alice told Emma the burning of the dress was the worst thing Lizzie could have done. At about 7 p.m. on August 11th, Lizzie was arrested and charged with murdering her father and stepmother. On August 22nd, she returned to the police headquarters for her preliminary hearing, after which Judge Blaisdell pronounced her probably guilty. On August 27th, the New York Times published an article titled Lizzie Borden's Ordeal, in which the district attorney says that he is well satisfied with the development of the web of circumstantial evidence which he is endeavoring to weave about Lizzie Borden, and the government asserts that its belief in the guilt of the young woman has increased greatly since the testimony of Bridget Sullivan. Lizzie was held at Taunton Jail until the start of her trial on June 5, 1893, in New Bedford, where she pleaded not guilty. It was stated that the most remarkable feature of the trial has been the demeanor of Lizzie Borden. From start to finish, she has manifested no feeling of weakness and has listened to the recital of the most cold-blooded and shocking details of the crime with a perfectly impassive and unmoved countenance. From the day of the murder and into her trial, Lizzie's testimonies had been increasingly contradictory. By June 20th, the prosecution did not have enough tangible evidence to convict Lizzie, and the jury returned with the verdict of not guilty on all counts. Lizzie and Emma returned home for purchasing a 14-room Queen Anne-style home on the hill, which they named Maplecroft. They also built a monument at the graves of Andrew and Abby. Lizzie started using the name Lisbeth instead, perhaps to separate herself from the murders, but the people of Fall River remembered the atrocities, and over the years, Lizzie became more and more isolated, being avoided and taunted by her fellow townspeople. You may have heard the schoolyard rhyme that often accompanies her name. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks, and when she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. Lizzie eventually began traveling to theater hotspots like Boston, New York, and Washington, D.C., and made some friends along the way. Later on, Lizzie was even throwing lavish parties at the mansion on the hill. In 1905, Emma moved out of Maplecroft, stating for a Boston newspaper, "The happenings at the French Street house that caused me to leave I must refuse to talk about. I did not go until conditions became absolutely unbearable. It is not known exactly why Emma left." In June of 1927, Lizzie died at the age of 68, and Emma died just over a week later at the age of 76. The deaths of Andrew and Abby were not the only instances of murder in the history of the Borden family or Fall River. Going back in the timeline, after losing his wife Maria in 1838, Lizzie's great-uncle Lodwick had met a new suitor named Eliza Darling. The two were married in 1842, and Eliza was pregnant with her first daughter, who they named Maria. Not long after, Eliza gave birth to Eliza Ann in 1847 and Holder in 1848. Postpartum depression quickly set in for Eliza. Later in 1848, Eliza took Holder and Eliza Ann and dropped them down the cellar cistern. She then went behind the chimney and slit her throat with one of Lodwick's razors. This reportedly occurred in what would later become the home of Andrew Borden and his family. The Satanist murders. On October 13th, 1979, the naked body of 17-year-old Doreen Levesque, a runaway and sex worker from New Bedford, was found behind the Demon Vocational High School under the bleachers. Her attacker had tied her wrists with fishing wire, sexually tortured her, and stabbed her in the head several times. It is also said she could have possibly been stoned to death, as the medical examiner explained that multiple people were probably involved in the murder and that the crime had a ritualistic element to it. In November, Andy Maltese from Fall River reported his girlfriend, 22-year-old Barbara Raposa, missing. Andy expressed to the police that he believed her disappearance was linked to a cult of devil worshippers that controlled the drug trade in the area. Andy then revealed that he was a former Satanist, convicted pedophile, sexual sadist, Andy also told him that he and Barbara were members of the cult and that he could arrange a meeting between the police and two other members, 20-year-old Karen Marsden and 17-year-old Robin Murphy. After a few hours, Karen broke down and told the police Carl Drew killed Doreen Levesque. Carl Drew was a violent man who was known to be Doreen's pimp. Karen stated that Carl called himself Satan and used his prostitution ring as a front for his cult. On January 26, 1980, Barbara Raposa's body was found in the woods behind an abandoned factory. Andy came forward and claimed he had a vision of Barbara's death and where her body was after her body had already been found, and he was arrested and charged with murder. Robin then came forward and said she was willing to testify against Andy in exchange for immunity. Robin stated for the police that she was present for the murders of Doreen and Barbara. She said that Andy attacked Barbara, leaving her to crawl in the woods to die before he drove away from the scene with Robin. In March, fragments of a skull belonging to Karen Marsden were found near Devil Pond. Devil Pond? Devil Pond? Devil? I don't... Devil Pond? Devil Pond. Another local sex worker and member of the cult named Carol Fletcher came forward about Robin and Carl, and Robin subsequently confessed about the cult. Robin explained that being a member of the cult involved conjuring demons, speaking in tongues, and ritual human sacrifice taking place on each full moon. Before actually killing the victim, the cult members would torture them in order to force the victim to a maximum state of emotional arousal. Robin then confessed to her involvement in Karen's murder. She told the police that Karen's hair and nails were ripped out before having her head chopped off and kicked around like a soccer ball. Robin pleaded guilty and was given a life sentence in exchange for her testimony against Carl Drew, who was tried and convicted for the murders of Donna Levesque and Karen Marsden. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Robin was released in 2004, but returned in 2011 for violating her parole. The Ghosts of Fall River. In 2004, Lance Zoll, entrepreneur and owner of U.S. Ghost Adventures, purchased the Borden murder house for close to $2 million. Since then, the house has been converted into a themed bed and breakfast. Adding on to the existing 90-minute tour of the house, Lance introduced a 90-minute ghost tour and a 2-hour ghost hunt. According to Smithsonian Magazine, Lance is also planning to launch a podcast, virtual experiences, themed dinners, nighttime ghost tours of Fall River, and murder mystery nights. Lance also plans to convert the basement into a rentable bedroom and list the house as a wedding venue. Lance seems to be insensitive and disrespectful toward the 1892 murders, even hosting events that feature axe throwing at the murder house. To this, Lance retorted, "Who's being murdered here? I mean, no one's murdering anybody. We want you to have a good time." Over the years, innumerable people have claimed to have had one or several paranormal experiences at the bed and breakfast. Often reported are the ghosts of Abby and Andrew, Holder and Eliza Ann, and sometimes even Lizzie herself, though it is said she also haunts Maplecroft. Many people have claimed to have heard sounds of creaking or footsteps, children's laughter, and seen apparitions on a wall in the basement. At Profile Rock in Freetown State Forest, some ghost hunters captured EVPs of the words, "You will serve Satan," and the names Doreen and Carl Drew. Right. That's what I got. That's the research I have. I tried to get as much tangible, real information in there as I possibly could. But I will say, as much as I want the place to be haunted, because I like ghosts, I really don't think it is. I think it's just, they're doing it all for publicity, and Lance is the mastermind behind it all, so, I do believe that maybe there have been some paranormal experiences in that house, because, yeah, maybe Abby and Andrew are still about, maybe, but... Oh, and the kids too, I don't know. It's just, it's too commercial. It's too commercial. And turning it into a wedding venue? Really? Like people were murdered there. It's one of the most famous murders in American history, right? So I feel like it's a bit disrespectful. I mean, like, it's like, I guess if you want like a creepy wedding, yeah, that could be cool, but like real people were murdered there. I don't know. Like, what do you guys think? What do you guys think? Tell me what you think. Like, is it disrespectful? Do you think it's okay since, like, he said no one's getting murdered here? Like, I don't know. Well, yeah. So there's a lot of information that isn't available. You know, I need more. So, I hope you liked the video. Do you think Lizzie did it? Do you think it's haunted? What do you think? Tell me what you think in the comments. And don't forget to like the video. Thanks for watching. See you next time.